We use letter names such as C or A or G to label and designate different pitches. We recognize these pitches as being different notes. This A has a different sound than this C, for instance. For one, we perceive it as being slightly lower in pitch. Sound travels in the form of sound waves through the air, and when this piano string is being struck, it will generate sound waves of certain frequencies. But this also works in the other direction. A string tuned to a particular note can respond and begin to vibrate when it hears that frequency. The sound waves will incite the string to vibrate itself. This is called resonance, and it can easily be demonstrated on the piano. When I play a key on the piano, like here, a felt hammer is being propelled and strikes a set of strings. Here you can see that it strikes 3 strings at the same time. These 3 strings are all tuned to the same frequency and therefore produce the same pitch. Here, I can pluck these 3 strings with my finger, one by one. And you can hear that they produce the same sound. And now I dampen them, and the sound stops. Now, if I just pluck just one of those strings, and then immediately dampen it, you can hear that there is still some sound that remains. I pluck it, I dampen, and the sound continues. This is because the string that I have just plucked has incited the other 2 strings to respond. They do so because they are tuned to the same pitch as the string that I just plucked. And so they respond to the sound waves generated by that first string. This is called resonance. And now things will get a little more interesting. If I slowly depress a key on the keyboard, you can see the damper is being lifted and released, but no sound is being produced. Now these strings are free to vibrate. So right now I've lifted the damper for the note C, and I'm going to play C 1 octave lower and then release it right away so that the low C will stop. And even though I only briefly struck this key, you can hear that the sound has been picked up by this higher C. And you can hear this string responding. Well, okay, you might say, well, it is, after all, also a note C. So there is some relation between those 2 pitches. Why wouldn't C resonate with another C? Fair enough. But let's now take a completely different note, a G. And I will do the same here, slowly depressing the G so that the G string is now free to resonate. And I will strike the low C again, very briefly. And can you hear that the G string, that this sound here, this string is responding and resonating with the tone C that I just played, even though this G is a completely different pitch. I'll do it once without depressing the G. The sound stops. But when I have this G down, you will hear this sound respond, this pitch respond. I'll do it with E up here as well. Just a little bit of this, very faint. But it's there if you can hear it. Why would G or E resonate if the note that I played is neither G nor E, but C? The only logical explanation is that G and E must actually be contained as tones within this note C. And that is exactly the case. When you hear a pitch produced by an instrument, you actually hear a combination of different frequencies, not just one clear single frequency. In fact, you will hear several notes at once. And these other tones are called overtones. When I play the low C, for example, the most prominent, the loudest tone you hear is in fact that low C that I played. This is called the fundamental. But in this sound, you also hear another higher C, then a G, then an even higher C again, then an E, then a G again, and after that, many more notes. These overtones are called partials. And all these new partials are being heard in diminishing degree as we go up the overtone series. But the first few partials are pretty prominent. And that is why the G string resonated when I played the note C. It's simply because G is contained within C. It is a rather strange thing because we use those letter names to designate a tone like C, which we call C, and not G, precisely because it is different from G. But then we have to say and admit that C cannot be produced on an instrument without at the same time producing G as well and E as well. These partials, these overtones, are our subatomic particles. The fact that we perceive a single note from an instrument as just one pitch is an illusion created by our brain. In fact, we're not hearing a single note, we are hearing a conglomerate of pitches. We are really hearing a chord. And this is true of any instrument, not just the piano. Now, what chord are we hearing when we hear the sound created by the key C? Let's look again at our series of overtones. We hear what we call C, the fundamental, and then most prominently the next few partials, C, G, C again, and E. C, G, C, and E. These are the partials. Let's go back to the beginning of Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata. The very first thing you hear in this sonata is this low C. But as you now know, this means that by playing this first note, we also are creating and hearing the tones C, G, C, and E. And the very next thing that Beethoven writes in this is this spelled out chord with the notes C, G, C, E from bottom to top. Same tones in the exact same order as the partials of the single note C. This first note is the musical Big Bang, which instantly gives birth to further notes, which are then arranged into a chord, and out of which a theme is spun. Beethoven was relentless in his pursuit of developing large works based on just the tiniest musical ideas. And in the case of the Waldstein Sonata, it seems that his original idea is all contained within the first note of the piece, the single C. But perhaps at this point, you might rightly interject that the note C followed by a C major chord, in other words, C combined with the notes E and G, is not really particular to this sonata or to Beethoven's writing at all. It is, after all, the most common combination of notes. Indeed, and this gives us a hint that this single note is not just a musical Big Bang for the Waldstein Sonata, but on the contrary, the Big Bang of all tonal music. And the way in which the major scale and the rules governing harmony in tonal music can be found within one single note will be the subject of our further explorations in part 2 of my music notes.